I know what you're thinking. Brienne of Tarth couldn't possibly be the most important character in George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. She's not even introduced until the second book. She's someone who is generally growing in importance as the story goes on, but she really isn't a main focus of the plot as a whole. Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, the Moon Boy, for all I know, all of these characters are central to the overall plot of the story. But I'm not talking about the plot of the story. I'm talking about the story's themes, the ideas and philosophies that Martin wants to impart on the reader about our world and about his world are communicated by many characters throughout his story. But I personally believe that Brienne of Tarth is the thematic core of so many of these ideas that Martin thinks are so important. Specifically, I think four of them are incredibly well embodied in Brienne's journey throughout A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, and A Feast for Crows. And today, that's what we're going to be going over, those four themes and how I think they're embodied incredibly well in Brienne's story, and why she has grown into one of my favorite point of view characters, from a character that I really didn't care about when I first read the series. This is going to be a bit more of an English essay than most of my typical videos, but I hope you all enjoy this. If you do, be sure to leave a like, subscribe. That does really help grow the channel, and I do really appreciate it. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the themes of A Song of Ice and Fire and Brienne of Tarth's role in enforcing them. So, a quick rundown of Brienne and her story for those who haven't reread the books as recently as I have. I actually just finished a reread of Feast, and that was mostly what inspired this video, as I've really grown to love her story and that book in particular. We first meet Brienne through Catelyn's perspective in A Clash of Kings. She's a knight serving on Renly Baratheon's Kingsguard, called the Rainbow Guard. She's a female knight. That is a very rare thing in Westeros. It's actually really never heard of prior to Brienne. And she fights with plate mail and a massive sword, and she's very strong and not very beautiful, though that's earned her the name Brienne the Beauty in an ironic sense. She does love Renly, though, as Renly always treated her well where many other lords really didn't. This is why she pledges her sword to Renly. However, as we know, Renly is killed by his brother Stannis Baratheon by using dark magic, and Catelyn and Brienne both flee the camp together. Brienne then swears her sword to Catelyn in an attempt to find her daughters and return them to her, and this is what leads Brienne to Jaime Lannister. From this point forward, Brienne and Jaime become incredibly pivotal characters to each other's arcs. Brienne is charged with bringing Jaime back to King's Landing in exchange for the freedom of Catelyn's daughters. She does this throughout A Storm of Swords, and this journey very much changes both Jaime and herself, and it alters their perspectives on the world and on honor, and we'll get into that in a later section. However, once they arrive there, neither of the Stark girls are there, and Brienne is discharged by Jaime with the sword Oathkeeper, which is a Valyrian steel sword, in order to find the Stark daughters. Mostly Sansa, as everyone thinks that Arya is dead at this point. So for Feast for Crows, the fourth book in the series, Brienne ventures out into the Riverlands in the hopes of finding Sansa and goes on this long and winding journey through this war-torn land that gives us great insight into both the lands themselves, the Riverlands, and how they've been ravaged by this conflict, and into Brienne's psyche itself and how she might play a role in the story to come and its themes. The first theme that I think Brienne embodies quite well is the theme of nonconformity. Early on in the first book, Tyrion Lannister mentions that he has a soft spot for cripples, bastards, and broken things, and I believe the author, George R. R. Martin, tends to have the same soft spot. He likes to challenge his characters with some form of impairment, either physical or mental or perceived in some way. This really allows for characters to have a lot of growth and internal conflict and external conflicts with the world as a whole and their place in it, and no character embodies this better than Brienne. From the outset, she is a female warrior, which is kind of an oxymoron in the world of Westeros. There really haven't been any female warriors in Westerosi history, and it really makes sense that she would be just having this internal conflict right from the jump. Basically, everyone we see her come across questions her from the outset, essentially denying the fact that she could possibly be a warrior, despite the fact that she's one of the best warriors that we meet in our story. She's able to go toe-to-toe with Jaime Lannister, though Jaime Lannister was weakened by starvation, but still, it's quite an accomplishment nonetheless. And she has to work extra hard to prove herself because of this, because she's non-conforming to the typical roles of Westeros. This really ties into a number of themes for a number of characters. We have Jaime losing his hand. We have Bran losing his ability to walk. It also ties into some of the themes of House of the Dragon and Fire and Blood, with the issues of gender and its relationship to power overall. As this is a massive theme in Martin's work, it does seem to very much be reflected perfectly in Brienne as a character. The second theme is one that I really didn't associate with Brienne until I revisited her role in A Clash of Kings, that being vengeance. Once Renly is killed, she is consumed by this desire to get revenge on Stannis, to slay the man who killed the man she loved. And this idea of vengeance being a vile thing that consumes people is central to Martin's storytelling. We see it with Arya, we see it with Lady Stoneheart, we see it with plenty of characters throughout. And Brienne's journey with vengeance, despite the fact that it's shorter than most in the series, and it's while she isn't a point of view character, is a reflection of what Martin thinks the right way to handle vengeance is. The best way to handle vengeance is to have that anger and that drive for a brief moment, but channel it into other things. Rather than pursuing Stannis as she wanted to, she instead swears herself to Catelyn Stark, to preserving what good she can in the world in trying to save Catelyn's daughters, rather than pursuing death and vengeance and continuing this cycle. This is part of why I don't like parts of her arc in the show, as she does choose to abandon Sansa for the sake of vengeance, which very much goes against that idea that she so very much is against in the books. The third theme that I believe Brienne embodies is not one that she herself embodies, but it's more shown in her story throughout A Feast for Crows. I believe that the Brienne chapters in A Feast for Crows are Martin's thesis statement for A Song of Ice and Fire as a whole. For those who haven't been in an English classroom as recently as I have, a thesis statement essentially means, in this context, something that is the core idea of whatever work it is a part of. It is the message that Martin wants to get across. And we know that Martin is a very anti-war guy due to his history with Vietnam and that sort of thing. And we see through Brienne's chapters in Feast the horrors that the War of the Five Kings has unleashed upon the Riverlands. We see destruction up close and personal of families, of communities, of all of these things. And there are several incredibly poignant passages throughout all of Feast, and especially throughout Brienne's chapters that deal with this. The core theme of A Feast for Crows as a book is that idea, a feast for crows, that this massive conflict has left nothing but corpses around, none but the worst in society are profiting from it, and Brienne sees that firsthand. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that one of Brienne's chapters in Feast contains my favorite speech from the entire series. It's delivered by one Septon Maribald at the Quiet Isle, and it's essentially encapsulating this core idea of the horrors of war and what it does to an individual. It's called by the fans the Broken Man speech often, and it is kind of emulated in the show, but the true greatness of this speech is only really captured in the text. I highly encourage you to look it up and read it yourself. I'm going to read the last passage here in order to kind of fully show the theme a little bit. So, to quote from that chapter of A Feast for Crows, "And the man breaks. He turns and runs, or crawls off afterward after the corpses of the slain, or steals away in the black of night, and he finds some place to hide. All thought of home is gone by then, and kings and lords and gods mean less to them than a haunch of spoiled meat that will let him live another day, or a skin of bad wine that might let him drown his fear for a few hours. The broken man lives from day to day, from meal to meal, more beast than man. Lady Brienne is not wrong. In times like these, the traveler must beware of broken men and fear them, but he should pity them as well." Brienne's story focuses not on those who wage war, but those who suffer for it. The people fighting on the front lines, who are disposed of by their lords and by the knights at the first opportunity, who are not cared for, despite the fact that they're expected to engage and give up their lives just for the sake of one lord or another. This ties into many real-world issues that we face as well, things like the treatment of veterans after things like the Vietnam War. This really ties into a lot of things that seem to be close to George R.R. Martin's heart in terms of the thematic purpose of A Song of Ice and Fire, and I believe that that really lends itself to being a massive tentpole of the series as a whole, and I think that's part of why Brienne's story in A Feast for Crows speaks to me so much and just seems so important to the story in its entirety. The final theme I wish to discuss today is perhaps the one you most associate with Brienne of Tarth, that being the idea of honor and duty and vows. Her, Jaime, and Ned Stark are the central characters who tend to obsess over this sort of thing more than any other. And Brienne seems to be at the forefront of it both for herself and for Jaime, as Jaime is someone who is defined by failing his oaths previously, or rather by his oaths being conflicting and him having to make an impossible choice between them. Brienne starts out as someone like Jaime at the start of his arc, prior to the story beginning, before he had killed the king, back when he was just some knight on the Kingsguard. Both of them were idealistic. Both of them tend to just focus on their vows and think that is the only thing that matters in the world. However, as things grow more complicated and more muddy, this vision of the vows that they have made in the past tends to grow blurry. We see this in Brienne's story throughout A Feast for Crows. We see her driven by the vow she made to Jaime and to Cat to save the Stark girls and to uphold Jaime's vow to Cat as well. And overall, she tries her best to do this, but overall has to deal with herself coming up short in a lot of regards. She doesn't find the Stark girls in the books. In the show, she does, and it's not great, but in the books, she doesn't find them. But she does find Cat herself. And this brings a massive point of conflict into Brienne's arc as a whole. At the end of Brienne's story in A Feast for Crows, she's confronted by the woman to which she swore this initial oath, Lady Stoneheart, Catelyn Stark, reborn, resurrected, and fueled by this idea of vengeance that Brienne herself once rejected. It is at this moment that she realizes that her vows, those that she's been following so carefully, might be what doom her. Catelyn demands that she either hang or bring her Jaime Lannister's head, as she believes that Brienne has failed her oath in freeing Jaime but not bringing her daughters back. In this moment, Brienne seems willing to hang rather than to sacrifice Jaime. However, it's another conflict that brings her back from this brink of death. You see, Brienne is not the only one who's going to be hanged here. It's her and it's Podrick. In the books, Podrick is just a little kid, and she doesn't want to see him die for her failed oaths. The last thing she sees in her chapter before closing her eyes and finally making her choice is this young boy about to have his life snuffed out. And in that moment, she decides that her oaths to Cat and to Jaime might be worth less than saving the life of this singular innocent. And that's a lot of what Martin's work is about. It's the idea that these oaths that we make are so well defined and so rigid, but the world isn't rigid. Anything can be moving at any time. To quote Logan Roy from Succession, everything is moving all the time, forever. Overall, this really ties into the idea that all of these oaths are generally relative, and it doesn't matter so much what you swear to do, but rather what choices you make in the moment and how that defines you as a person and how you define yourself as a person, as Brienne does. As I mentioned at the top of this video, Brienne's chapters in A Feast for Crows were initially quite boring to me. They, at first glance, seem like they're just very repetitive and ultimately don't really get anything done. It's kind of a waiting for Godot situation where it seems like they're just waiting for something to happen and it never really does. But upon closer examination, not only of A Feast, but of Brienne's journey as a whole, I think she is far and away the most thematically important character to A Song of Ice and Fire. So this has been the video. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Brienne or other characters in the comments below. This video wasn't scripted. This was just me going on a little bit of a rant about Brienne because I had an idea about her being this kind of thematic core to the series. And I really wanted to run with it and just talk about it while I had this momentum and idea. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe while you're down there. I'd really appreciate it. Got a lot of fun stuff coming up, if I could speak, and I hope you guys will be here to watch it. I'd really appreciate that. And yeah, I thank you all for watching and have a great day. I will see you all soon.